No justice! No justice! No justice! No justice!
Lights. Police lights. My heart tries to burst from my chest. I can feel myself locking up, the world narrowing around me. I'm 26 years old, and this is my first time being pulled over by the police. Ever. It's as a visible black trans man in small town Alabama, one of the most racist parts of the United States of America. It's a late night in May, and I'm not prepared. I try to make my body as small and quiet as possible, because my brain can't tell the difference between him and a tiger. He lets me go with a warning. In our short conversation, I'm made aware of the chasm of power between us. It terrified me. I got home and had a breakdown that lasted 3 weeks.
Dozens of mass activists hold space in the streets of Baltimore. It is a chilly August day, but the skies are blue and cicadas are still screaming. I look at the faces in the crowd and think about a thesis that I wrote almost 3 years ago about the Black Pride 4's protest of Stonewall Columbus Pride in Ohio, 2017. The Black Pride 4 were a group of activists who stopped a majority white pride parade to hold space and silence for murdered trans women of color. Within 10 seconds, the police, supported by Stonewall Columbus Pride, responded by violently tackling the protesters, spraying them with mace, and pushing them onto police bikes, arresting them. Not only were the 4 abandoned by the Pride organization in Columbus, but the organization actively mobilized against these Black trans activists. Stonewall Columbus Pride supported a police state that criminalizes and murders Black people every day. As a white trans person from Appalachia, I felt it necessary to call out my queer community for its utilization of white supremacy for social capital. Assimilation is violence. 45% of gay white men voted for Trump in 2020. Fascism, white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy are pillars in the white LGBT movement. I was not at the Black Pride 4's protest in 2017, but it reached me, an undergraduate student in Maryland, via Feministing and Teen Vogue. By calling out members of the queer community invested in systems of domination, I hope to help aid in those queer movements that challenged pink capitalism and homo nationalism by centering Black, queer, and trans voices.
A few days later, an elder Black male friend called me. I had convinced myself that I was fine. Within a few moments of me mentioning being pulled over, he asked if I was okay. I began sobbing and shaking with fear. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stand, and he walked me through the panic. Once I'd calmed a bit, he reminded me that this is always a hard moment, but more so as a Black American transgender man. Living at the intersection of these identities means that many find my very existence a threat. These identities mark me with a high likelihood of being killed either by the police or in my daily life. Worse, I'd never had the opportunity to have the talk. The talk is a speech Black parents are supposed to give their children about interacting with the police to help them stay calm and avoid missteps that have deadly consequences. It normally happens when you're learning to drive at 16, but I hadn't learned to drive until much later in life. So, I missed this pivotal piece of Black life and safety. I told him how I tried to prepare by reading books, deciding when I wanted to say I had a panic disorder, keeping my paperwork close by, and listening to accounts, and my utter failure to do any of it right. The officer and I had roles in a tragic dance. Although there was no audience, my inability to complete the correct actions significantly raised the stakes and the likelihood of my death on that quiet night. When I was pulled over, I became aware that I was playing a deadly game with a lot of overlapping stakes, and I had little ability to change that fact. Choreopolitics is a theory of bodies and movement as potential ways of looking at dialogue and political action that, more than what is shouted, matters, including actions like die-ins, raised fists, and hands-up gestures. There are a lot of ways of breaking down physical movements, what those choices say about us, how we are feeling, and the messages we are hoping to convey.
Choreopolitics, or political choreography, is also the concept that mobilization is a performative manifestation of space, an aesthetic movement that is embodied within the individual. Imagine the body moving and controlling their own space, creating a site of resistance, troubling normative power structures. If we can perform politics as an individual, what is the transformative potential for protest as a creative process, as a choreography, as a revolutionary tool? It was with this in mind that I came to the March for Breonna Taylor in August. If my queer body mattered, especially as a challenge to the white supremacist and carceral state that criminalizes and kills Black bodies that are viewed as disposable, it was imperative for me to be in the streets. Looking through the crowd, a conglomeration of queers, about half white allies and half Black activists and leaders, I immediately thought of the power of saying, whose streets? Our streets. Dance scholar Susan Felmer contends that artistic practices can become agents in the truest sense of the word, performative, biopolitical mediators of protests that can, at least temporarily, subvert established boundaries of political behavior and systems. The choreopolitical act we were embodying, the act of saying her name, Breonna Taylor, the acoustic soundscape of the back and forth of the call and repeat, whose lives matter, Black lives matter, no justice, no peace.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
Were a performative act that directly challenged normative structures of power. My hands are holding the hands of my friends. They are screaming, "Fuck 12." A police helicopter circles above us as we walk the protest route. Volunteers in green hats from the National Lawyers Guild write down each move of the cops following us. Fists are in the air and hands are up as we chant. In 2014, in the wake of the murders of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Garner in New York City, dance scholar Anusha Kedar wrote that movement matters. bodies matter, particularly when people are protesting the Black body's disposability at the hands of the state. Choreography, movement, and gesture are not peripheral, but central to the politics of protest. Not only is protest embodied in their gestures and choreography, as Kedhar contends, but protest itself is choreopolitical. If our bodies matter as vehicles for political change, as well as artistic tools to dismantle structures of power, each body is imbued with meaning, power, and the potential to create unimaginable change in the world.
In that moment, I was overwhelmed by the immense chasm of power between us. I was gaining an understanding of what it meant to be Black in this country, and of the power of the actions I did or did not take. I knew the rules, but I was still frozen in fear, shocked into stillness by the sudden viewing of myself and my body through the eyes of another, and then coming to face with what W.E.D. Du Bois, a Black sociologist, calls double consciousness. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals, and one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The more marginalized positions you occupy at one time, the more you are forced to become conscious of the multiple identities you are perceived through, and experience more than just double consciousness, as Du Bois describes. The moment I looked into the bright white light of the officer's flashlight, I became disturbingly aware of that fact. It broke me. As I finally came out of this deep, dark, existential nightmare, I sat down to work on describing my experience. Then I saw it. A video of a Black man dying in police hands. Again. I hear he cried. I did not watch. I sat at my desk as the protests revved into action again, struck by my deep fear of driving. I would be unable to protest in person. How do you participate in a protest when you can't go out? How does one protest in a digital space in a non-performative way? I began to write, to give the stories and thoughts, to lean into the intellectual side of Black protest traditions. I told my stories. I engaged with people online and rallied people behind collective action. Perhaps most importantly, I rejected the role of the quietly compliant, and every keystroke became an act of rebellion of its own.